The stars looked calm that night, scattered across the endless dark sky, but deep in the silence of space, war was already waiting to break loose. For centuries, the galaxy had been ruled by alien empires, their power unchallenged and their arrogance stretching across countless worlds. They believed humans were fragile, too weak to rise above the chains of servitude. Yet somewhere in the shadows, destiny was preparing something different. On the outer rim of a forgotten sector, a fleet of alien warships gathered. Their queen, a figure of beauty and power, commanded them with eyes colder than the void itself. She had no equal in cunning or strength. Her voice was soft like silk, but behind it hid storms that had toppled civilizations. Entire races had bent to her will, promising loyalty just to survive. Still, no empire lasted without challenge, and rumors of rebellion whispered through the stars. The humans, underestimated and pushed into corners, had grown restless. They were few compared to the alien armies, but they carried something the galaxy had long forgotten: hope. To the aliens, hope was a weakness, but to humans, it was fuel. Every loss only hardened them. Every wound turned into resolve. And when they looked at their captors, they did not see gods. They saw chains that one day could break. It was in this tension that one human caught the Queen's attention. He was no warrior of great fame, no general leading armies. He was simply a man who refused to bow. On the battlefield, he stood firm when others ran. In the dungeons, he spoke boldly, even while beaten. His courage was not wrapped in strength of body, but in strength of will. And that will became a thorn in the Queen's heart, a curiosity she could not ignore. Their first meeting was not planned. He was brought before her court after a skirmish, his body bruised but his spirit unbroken. The hall was filled with alien nobility, their eyes glowing with contempt. Yet as the Queen studied him, something unusual stirred. Most humans begged for mercy, but this one looked her in the eye as if daring her to strike him down. His silence spoke louder than pleas. It was not fear that filled him, but defiance. The Queen leaned closer, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "You stand before the one who holds your life in her hand. Do you not fear death?" The man's reply was calm, steady, almost unnerving. "Death is nothing if I bow to tyranny. I would rather fall standing than live crawling." Gasps filled the hall. No human had ever spoken so boldly to the Queen. The aliens waited for her fury, expecting him to be struck down instantly. But instead, the Queen smiled. A small, sharp smile that carried both amusement and danger. HFY saw something in him, something rare. And in that moment, her thoughts shifted. This human was not like the others. He was a spark, and sparks had a way of igniting fires. She ordered his release against the counsel of her generals. Some whispered that the Queen had grown reckless. Others feared she was planning something far worse. But deep within, the Queen herself was uncertain. She had promised herself that no human could ever matter, yet this one unsettled her. He carried no weapon, no throne, no gold. Yet his presence shook her more than any army. The war outside continued to rage, but inside, the Queen's chamber, another kind of battle had just begun, one between power and defiance, between crown and courage, and neither side knew yet how deeply their fates were about to intertwine. The Queen's decision to release the human shocked everyone. Generals exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers sharp with doubt. To them, a human was nothing but a fragile creature, unworthy of respect, unworthy of mercy. Yet the Queen, who had crushed rebellions with her iron will, had spared him. Not only spared, but ordered him to stay within her palace as a guest. The human did not understand it either. He had expected death or perhaps slavery. Instead, he was given food, rest, and even clothing far finer than anything his people wore. Yet every kindness carried the weight of suspicion. Why would the Queen, feared across the galaxy, show him favor? At night, the palace glowed with soft alien light. Its walls shimmered with runes that shifted like living fire. Servants of strange shapes and colors bowed as they passed, their movements filled with unease. To them, he was an outsider and worse, a human. They avoided his eyes, whispering about curses and omens. But the queen did not avoid him. She watched him closely, as if he were a puzzle she needed to solve. One evening, she summoned him to her private garden. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Trees of silver leaves, flowers glowing with soft blue light, and streams that sang like voices. At the center stood the queen, her long gown flowing as if woven from the night itself. Her beauty was sharp and dangerous, like a blade, hidden in silk. "You confuse me," she said, her voice calm, almost curious. "You have no power, no riches, no army, yet you dare to defy me without trembling. Do you think yourself above death?" The human met her gaze without flinching. "No, but I believe death is easier than living without freedom. That is something you cannot take from me." Her eyes narrowed, but there was no anger, only intrigue. "Freedom is a dream for the weak. Power rules this galaxy, not ideals." "Then perhaps power fears ideals," he replied softly, "because they are the only things it cannot truly kill." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. The queen turned away, as though his words were thorns pressing into her thoughts. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by one she considered beneath her. And yet something about his defiance stirred a strange fire in her. She could have ended him then, with a single command, but instead she asked a question no one expected. "If I gave you the chance, if I promised you anything, what would you ask of me?" The human hesitated. It was a trap, surely. What could one man demand from the most powerful queen in the galaxy? He could ask for his freedom, but she might laugh at such a request. He could ask for the liberation of his people, but that might lead to their slaughter. And yet, something inside him whispered that this was more than a test. It was a moment where fate could shift. "You want me to ask for gold?" he said slowly. "Or for power? Or for safety? But those are not what I desire." Her lips curved faintly, as if amused. "Then what do you desire?" He looked at her, with steady eyes, his voice calm but unshaken. "I want truth. The truth of why you fight this endless war. The truth of what you fear so much that you must control the galaxy to hide it." The queen's smile faded. For the first time in centuries, someone had spoken words that pierced through the armor of her pride. The aliens who served her never dared to question her. Her enemies only saw her as a monster. But this human, he had asked for something no one else had ever dared. Truth. The word echoed in her mind long after he left the garden. And in that moment, the queen realized something she had never admitted even to herself. She was afraid. The queen could not sleep that night. His words, so simple yet so sharp, had carved their way into her mind. Truth. No human had ever dared to ask her such a thing. They begged for freedom, for food, for life itself. But he wanted the truth. It unsettled her, because deep within the walls of her empire there were truths she never spoke aloud. Truths that haunted even her. At dawn, she stood on the balcony of her chamber, looking over her sprawling palace. Armies moved like shadows in the distance, ships rising into the skies to fight battles she no longer cared to count. Her generals believed she fought for glory, for conquest, for control. But only she knew the weight behind the war. And now, a single human, a fragile creature in her eyes, had seen through her mask. She summoned him again, though this time not to gardens or halls of splendor. She had him brought to the war chamber where the galaxy itself was laid bare as a holographic map. Stars flickered in their places, lines of battle stretched across systems, and red marks showed where entire civilizations had fallen. "Do you know why I fight?" she asked, her voice cold but with a tremor she quickly hid. The human stepped closer, his eyes scanning the map. "Because you fear losing." Her jaw tightened. Few would have dared to say such words, but he was not wrong. "You believe me to be a tyrant," she said, her tone sharp. "You think I conquer for vanity, but look closer, human. These stars are not mine alone, they are doors, and beyond those doors are things this galaxy is not ready to face." He frowned. "Doors?" She waved her hand, and the hologram shifted. Beyond the borders of her empire, shadows twisted like smoke. Faint outlines of enormous shapes, creatures larger than ships, moved in the void. The wars you see are not only mine. I fight to keep them away. The empires you know are fragile, divided, foolish. If left to their own pride, they would open the way and doom us all. The human stared at the shapes. They were unlike anything he had ever imagined. Beasts of darkness, their forms shifting, their presence heavy even through the projection. And you believe you are the only one strong enough to stop them? I do not believe, the Queen said. I know. Without my hand, this galaxy will burn. For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. He looked at her, not with fear, but with something else, something she could not name. You fight monsters by becoming one yourself, he finally said. You rule through fear, through chains, through war. And maybe you've kept the darkness out, but what kind of light remains in here? He gestured at the palace, the armies, the endless red marks on the map. You're not protecting life. You're crushing it. And in the end, there may be no difference between the monsters beyond the doors and the Queen who guards them. The words cut deeper than any blade. She wanted to strike him down, to silence him forever. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no hatred, only sorrow. And that was worse. The Queen turned away, her voice quieter than she intended. You speak boldly for one who has nothing. He stepped forward. I have the one thing you cannot take. My will. And maybe that is why you fear me. Her heart clenched at those words. For the first time in her reign, she felt unsteady, as though the throne beneath her was cracking. The galaxy might still bow to her. But this one, human, had planted doubt, and doubt was more dangerous than any army. When the guards escorted him out, the Queen stood alone in the war chamber, staring at the endless stars. For centuries, she had promised herself she needed nothing from anyone. Yet now, she found herself asking a question that unsettled her more than the monsters in the void. What if he was right? The days that followed grew heavier for the Queen. Her generals demanded swift victories, her advisors whispered of rebellions, and the empire pressed forward with endless battles. Yet no matter how loud their voices were, one voice remained louder in her mind, the humans. At night, when silence fell over the palace, she would remember his words. You fight monsters by becoming one yourself. She told herself it was nonsense, the foolishness of a fragile creature who knew nothing of power. And yet, part of her knew he was not wrong. The human, on the other hand, found himself watched at every turn. Guards trailed his every step, though he walked calmly through the alien halls. Servants gossiped in hushed tones, some frightened, others curious. To them, he was nothing more than a strange anomaly the Queen had spared for reasons beyond understanding. But, even among the whispers, the human stood firm. He did not cower, nor did he raise his voice. He observed, he listened, and when spoken to, he answered with honesty that unsettled those who heard it. Slowly, quietly, he became a presence no one could ignore. The Queen called for him again. This time, not in gardens or war rooms, but in her private library. The room was vast, lined with shelves of ancient books and relics that pulsed with faint energy. She sat waiting, dressed not in her royal armor, but in a flowing gown. Her crown, resting aside. You asked me for truth, she said when he entered. But truth is a dangerous thing. Once spoken, it cannot be forgotten. Are you ready for that burden, human? He nodded without hesitation. Truth may be dangerous, but lies destroy more. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp, yet unreadable. Then she motioned for him to sit across from her. Very well. You will know part of it, but once you do, you will never see me the same again. She opened one of the old tomes, its pages filled with strange runes that shimmered faintly in the dim light. She began to tell him of the early days, long before her empire rose. Back then, she was not a queen, but a warrior, one among many who fought against the darkness that lurked beyond the stars. She spoke of the First War, when the creatures beyond the doors broke through, devouring worlds like fire consumes paper. She had lost people she once loved, people who had trusted her to protect them. And from that loss, she had forged her rule. "Every star I conquered was not for glory," she said, her voice heavy with a shadow of pain. "It was to build a wall high enough that nothing could ever pass again." The human listened carefully. He did not interrupt, nor did he mock her. When she paused, he asked softly, "And how many lives did you sacrifice to build that wall?" Her eyes hardened, though his question was not cruel, it was honest. "Countless," she admitted. "But without it, there would be no galaxy left to rule." He leaned forward, his voice steady but calm. "And if you build a wall so high that no one can breathe within it, is it truly protection? Or is it another kind of prison?" Her hands tightened around the edge of the book. No general, no rival, no advisor had ever spoken to her this way, yet she could not deny the sting of truth behind his words. "You speak like one who carries no weight," she whispered. "It is easy to question choices when you bear no throne." The human looked at her directly, his eyes unwavering. "Perhaps. But sometimes the one without the throne sees more clearly than the one chained to it." The queen felt her chest tighten. His words unsettled her, but not because they angered her. It was because, for the first time in centuries, she felt as though someone truly saw her. Not the queen, not the conqueror, but the being behind the crown. She closed the book and stood, hiding the tremor in her hands. "Enough for tonight," she said. But even as she dismissed him, her thoughts lingered. His presence was dangerous, not because of rebellion or weapons, but because he was changing something within her. And the queen, who once feared nothing, began to fear that change, most of all. The palace was never truly silent. Even in the deepest hours of the night there were footsteps of guards, the hum of alien machinery, and the soft flicker of glowing walls that pulsed like living veins. But to the human, it felt heavier now. Each shadow seemed to follow him. Each gaze carried questions he could not answer. Whispers grew louder among the queen's court. Generals muttered about his influence. Advisors feared he was planting seeds of rebellion in the queen's mind. Servants watched him as though expecting a storm to break at any moment. But despite the rising tension, the queen continued to summon him. This time, it was not to speak of war, nor of truths hidden in books. She called him to walk beside her through the palace halls, where the windows opened to the stars themselves. Ships moved across the darkness like glowing insects, armies, preparing for yet another battle. "Do you see them?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "Each ship, each soldier moves because I command it. Millions live and die by a single word from me. Do you understand the burden of such power?" The human studied the endless fleet, then turned to her. "A burden, yes. But perhaps it is not the power itself that weighs you down. Perhaps it is the loneliness of carrying it alone." Her steps faltered for a moment. Loneliness was a word she had not allowed herself to hear for centuries. She quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Loneliness is for the weak. A queen cannot afford such things. Or maybe," he replied softly, "a queen who denies it becomes weaker than she knows." The words lingered in her mind, but she pushed them aside. Still, she did not dismiss him. Instead, she led him deeper into the palace, to a chamber. Few had ever entered. It was a vault, guarded by runes and sealed by her own blood. When the doors opened, the human saw relics from ages past. Weapons of strange design, fragments of armor, and crystals that glowed faintly, as if alive. "These are the remains of the First War," she said. "Proof of what lies beyond the doors, of the galaxy. I keep them here, where only I can watch them. If others knew the truth, panic would consume everything we have built." The human walked among the relics, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of a broken blade. "You keep secrets to protect them. But secrets have a way of turning into chains. How long before your people grow to fear you more than the monsters you fight?" Her jaw tightened. "They already do." And how long before you fear yourself? He asked. The question cut through the chamber like a blade. She turned sharply to face him, anger flashing in her eyes. But behind the anger, there was something else. Pain she could not hide. For a moment, she looked not like a queen, but like a soul carrying centuries of weight. You speak as though you know me, she whispered. I do not know your throne, he said quietly. But I know the look of someone who carries scars, and yours are deeper than any crown could cover. Her breath caught, though she would never admit it aloud. No one had ever dared to speak to her like this. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than a ruler, more than a conqueror. Yet this human, fragile and ordinary, saw through her walls as though they were glass. She turned away quickly, her gown flowing like shadows behind her. Enough, she said, though her voice shook. Leave me. The guards moved to escort him, but not before he glanced back at her one last time. His eyes did not hold fear or hatred. They held something far more dangerous, understanding. When the doors closed and she was left alone, the queen sank onto the steps of the vault, her hands trembling. For the first time in centuries, she felt exposed, as though the armor of her soul had cracked, and deep inside she feared what was happening. Not just the war beyond the stars, but the war within her own heart. The queen sat in her chamber long after the human had left, her thoughts heavy with emotions she had buried for centuries. His words had pierced deeper than any blade, and she hated how they lingered. She had ruled empires, crushed rebellions, silenced generals with a glance. Yet one man, fragile and unarmed, had left her shaken, but the galaxy allowed no time for reflection. A messenger entered the throne room with urgent news. The outer defenses near the Forgotten Rim had fallen. A fleet of alien warlords, long thought broken, had risen again and attacked her forces. Worse, there were whispers of something beyond. Their ships, shadows in the void, moving like predators in the dark. Her generals demanded immediate retaliation. They spoke of destroying the enemy with overwhelming firepower. The queen listened, her expression cold, but deep within, unease stirred. She knew the warlords were not fools. If they were moving now, it meant something greater was driving them. That night, she summoned the human once more. He was brought to the war chamber where the holographic stars glowed with lines of battle spreading wider than before. He studied the map, then looked at her. This war you fight, it's slipping beyond your control, isn't it? He asked. Her eyes narrowed. Do not mistake honesty for wisdom, human. You know nothing of what I face. Then show me, he said. His tone was steady, not demanding, but it struck her like a challenge. For a moment she wanted to silence him, to remind him of his place. But another part of her, the part that had begun to change, chose differently. She activated the map, pulling back the image until it showed the galaxy's edge. There in the void beyond, faint shapes loomed, vast, shifting, alive. The human's breath caught. The monsters, she nodded. They stir again. I feel their hunger pressing against the doors. And if they come, no army in this galaxy will stand against them. He turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. Then maybe the answer isn't more chains. Maybe the answer is unity. Not through fear, but through choice. The queen let out a sharp laugh, though it carried no true amusement. Unity? These worlds hate each other. They hate me. Do you think they would ever stand side by side willingly? Maybe. Not for you, he replied. But perhaps for what's coming. Even the fiercest rivals will fight together if the alternative is being devoured. His words unsettled her, because somewhere deep down she had thought the same. Yet her pride, her need for control, had never allowed her to voice it. To her generals, strength was domination. To her people, she was a shield of fear. But this human, with no crown and no army, spoke of another path. Their conversation was cut short when alarms blared through the palace. A messenger rushed in, his voice urgent. My queen, the warlords have broken through another sector. They carry weapons we have never seen before, corrupted, infused with the darkness from beyond. They are not fighting alone. The Queen's eyes darkened. This was worse than she had feared. The enemy had already touched the shadows. The monsters beyond the doors were no longer waiting. They were reaching through. She dismissed the messenger and turned back to the human. You see now why I cannot afford weakness. One slip, one crack in the wall, and everything falls. He looked at her, steady and unafraid. Then don't fight it alone. You may be strong, but even you cannot hold back the dark forever. The Queen fell silent, his words echoing in her mind. She hated them, and yet she could not deny their truth. For centuries, she had ruled by fear, but fear would not be enough to stop what was coming. And as the palace trembled with the sounds of war brewing at its gates, the Queen realized something she had never admitted before. The human was not just a curiosity. He was becoming the one voice she could not ignore. The palace shook as distant explosions rumbled across the skies. The warlords had pushed further than anyone expected, their fleets tearing through defenses like fire through dry wood. From her throne, the Queen listened to the endless reports. Worlds falling, armies scattered, soldiers consumed by weapons that seemed half machine, half nightmare. Her generals shouted for vengeance. Crush them, one demanded. Unleash the full strength of the empire before they reach the core. But the Queen sat in silence, her gaze fixed on the stars flickering across the war map. She could see the pattern forming. The warlords were not fighting for conquest alone. They were paving a path, a corridor straight to the edge of the galaxy. And beyond that edge waited the shadows. The human stood at her side, silent at first until she finally spoke. They are not fools, she said. They are opening the doors. His voice was calm, but heavy with realization. Then the monsters aren't coming. They're being invited. The words hit the chamber like a blade. The generals scoffed, but the Queen silenced them with a glance. Deep down, she knew the human was right. Later, in the quiet of her private chamber, she dismissed the guards and allowed the human to remain. The weight of the war pressed heavily upon her, but more dangerous than the enemy outside was the storm growing inside her. You speak of unity, she said, her voice low. But unity requires trust. And trust is something I cannot give. If I reach out, the empires will tear me apart. Then don't reach as a conqueror, he replied. Reach as someone who admits she cannot fight this alone. She turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. Do you think weakness inspires loyalty? No, he said firmly. But honesty does. And if you show them the truth, the monsters, the warlords, the danger, maybe even your enemies will stand with you. Not for you, but for survival. The Queen paced, her gown sweeping across the polished floor. She had never bowed to anyone. She had never shown vulnerability, not once in her reign. To admit need was unthinkable. And yet, his words stirred, something she had long buried, the memory of the warrior she once was. Before the crown, before the empire, when she had fought alongside others instead of ruling above them. Do you trust them so easily? She asked bitterly. I don't trust empires, he answered. But I trust what people can do when they are cornered. Fear divides, but it also unites. She stopped, staring at him. His voice carried no deception, no strategy of ambition, only truth. And that truth pressed against her walls until she felt them cracking. Before she could respond, a messenger burst into the chamber, falling to one knee. My Queen! The warlords have pierced through another sector. They move with unnatural speed. Our ships cannot match them. The Queen clenched her fists. This was it. The warlords were forcing her into a choice. She could continue as she always had, ruling by fear and isolation, or she could gamble everything on a path she had long rejected. She dismissed the messenger and turned back to the human. If I follow your counsel, if I show them the truth, I risk everything. They may not unite. They may turn on me instead. The human met her gaze without flinching. And if you do nothing, the monsters will come. Then it won't matter who rules or who dies. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt cornered not by enemies but by her own doubts. She had built an empire on fear, but fear could not hold back the void forever. The silence stretched between them, heavy with decision. Finally, the queen exhaled slowly, her eyes hardening with resolve. "Then we will show them," she said. "We will reveal the truth. And if they choose to unite, we may yet have a chance." The human nodded, and in that moment the unthinkable happened. The galaxy's most feared queen had taken counsel from a man without crown, weapon, or army, and the fate of every star now balanced on that fragile, dangerous alliance. The queen had never summoned the galaxy before. In all her centuries of rule, she had spoken only to her armies, her advisors, her loyal vassals. But now, for the first time, she called every ruler, every warlord, every leader of every empire to hear her speak. The grand hall of the palace shimmered with projections. Holographic images of alien leaders filled the chamber, their faces twisted, with suspicion, hatred, or contempt. Some hissed curses the moment they saw her. Others watched in silence, waiting for her to make a mistake. At her side stood the human. To many, his presence was an insult. Murmurs rippled across the gathered leaders. Why was a fragile creature allowed in the queen's hall? Why did she let him stand so close? The queen raised her hand and the room fell quiet. Her voice, steady and commanding, echoed across the chamber. "You have called me tyrant. You have called me conqueror. You are not wrong. I have ruled with iron, and I have taken what I wished. But today, I speak not as your enemy, nor as your queen. Today, I speak as a survivor." The chamber stirred uneasily. Never had she spoken with such humility. With a gesture, she revealed the war map. The stars lit up, sectors burned in red, and beyond them loomed the shapes of the shadows. The monsters moved slowly but unmistakably, their vast forms shifting like storms across the void. "This," she said, her voice sharp, "is what I have fought to keep from you. This is what lies beyond the doors of the galaxy. They are waking, and those who call themselves warlords seek to open the way for them." Gasps spread through the chamber. Some leaders denied it at once, accusing her of lies to justify her empire. Others fell into fearful silence, their eyes fixed on the shifting forms of the monsters. The human stepped forward. His voice was calm but strong, carrying across the chamber. "You do not have to believe her. But look at the battles, look at the warlords, look at what they bring with them. The darkness is already here. And when it comes fully, no empire, no army, no world will survive alone." The room erupted in chaos. Voices clashed, some shouting for proof, others demanding to abandon their rivalries, others swearing they would never fight beside the queen. The weight of centuries of hatred and distrust filled the chamber, threatening to crush the fragile moment of truth. The queen stood tall, her eyes blazing with authority. "You may hate me, you may despise what I have done, but if you turn away from this, the monsters will consume you all. I offer not chains, but choice. Stand with me, and together we may survive. Stand against me, and the void will not care whose throne you sit on." Silence followed, heavy and uncertain. Some leaders lowered their heads, their expressions grim. Others cut their connections, unwilling to hear more. The chamber flickered as the projections vanished one by one. When it was over, only a handful remained, leaders of smaller empires, scattered worlds, and fragile alliances. They had chosen to stay not because they trusted her, but because they feared what was coming. The queen dismissed the meeting, her shoulders heavy with the knowledge that the galaxy was far from united. But it was more than she had expected. For the first time, she had not ruled through fear. She had asked, and some had answered. As the chamber emptied, she turned to the human. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost uncertain. Was this enough? He met her gaze with calm eyes. "It's a start. Sometimes one spark is all it takes to light the fire." She wanted to deny it, to bury the fragile hope his words brought. But as war raged closer and shadows pressed harder against the doors of the galaxy, The Queen knew she had already taken the first step onto a path she could never turn back from. And the human was no longer just a guest in her palace. He was the reason her empire might yet survive. The stars burned with war. Across the galaxy, fleets clashed in chaotic storms of fire and steel. The warlords had unleashed their full strength, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Their ships were no longer just machines of metal. They pulsed with living darkness, twisted by the monsters beyond the doors. Black tendrils lashed through space, consuming everything they touched. The Queen stood in her war chamber, her eyes locked on the shifting map. Entire sectors flickered red as one by one her defenses collapsed. Around her, generals barked orders, their voices strained with fear. Allies who had sworn to fight beside her were faltering already. Some worlds had withdrawn, retreating to their own borders. Others had vanished without a word, too terrified to stand. The human entered, his steps calm despite the chaos outside. "It's begun, hasn't it?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her jaw tight. "The shadows are here. The warlords are their servants now, and if the galaxy does not stand together, this will be the end of all things." He studied her face. Beneath the steel of her expression, he saw the weight pressing on her. This was no longer the battle of a queen protecting her throne. It was a fight for survival itself. The Queen summoned the remaining leaders through the projection system. Holographic figures appeared, their faces strained with panic. "We are being overrun," one cried. "Your empire is not enough to stop them. We should flee to the core and hide." "There is nowhere to hide," the Queen snapped, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "The shadows will devour every world. If you run, you only delay your end." But fear was stronger than logic. Some leaders shouted at each other, accusing the Queen of bringing this doom upon them. Others begged for mercy, for protection, for escape. The fragile alliance she had forged was breaking apart before her eyes. The human stepped forward. His voice rose above the chaos, steady and unyielding. "Listen to yourselves. You argue like children while the monsters tear your worlds apart. You can hate the Queen. You can despise each other. But if you do not stand now, side by side, there will be no galaxy left to fight over." The chamber fell silent for a moment. His words cut deeper than any command. Unlike the Queen, he spoke without authority, without armies. He spoke as someone who had nothing, and yet that gave his words power. The Queen looked at him, and for the first time, she realized he had become more than a voice of defiance. He had become her bridge to the galaxy, the one who could speak what she could not. When the meeting ended, some leaders still abandoned the fight, retreating into their fear. But others stayed. Not many, but enough. A fragile fleet was forming, small compared to the warlord's power, but it carried something the monsters could not devour: hope. As the last projection vanished, the Queen turned to the human. "You speak as though you were born for this." He shook his head. "I speak because someone has to, and maybe you've carried the weight alone for too long." Her gaze lingered on him. She hated to admit it, but he was right. Alone, even, her empire could not stand. But with him, this fragile, fearless human, something impossible was happening. The galaxy was beginning to rise piece by piece. Outside, the skies lit with fire as the warlords pushed ever closer. The shadows stretched longer, their presence thickening like a storm ready to break. The Queen clenched her fists. The final battle was coming, and for the first time she would not face it alone. The galaxy burned. Fleets clashed across the stars, their weapons blazing against the endless dark. But no matter how many ships fell, the shadows kept pushing forward. They were not an army of flesh and blood. They were hunger itself, devouring everything in their path. The Queen stood at the front of her flagship, her eyes locked on the monstrous shapes looming beyond the battlefield. The warlords had unleashed them fully now, and entire worlds vanished beneath their claws. Her empire, her power, her pride, none of it mattered if the galaxy fell tonight. Beside her stood the human. He had no armor, no weapon, no throne. Yet, his presence was stronger than any fleet. Where her generals barked orders in fear, he stood calm. Where her advisors whispered of retreat, he spoke of resolve. The Queen turned to him. Her voice, though steady, carried a weight she had never admitted before. This may be the end. Even with all our strength, they are endless. He looked at her without fear. Then, if this is the end, let it be one where we stand together. Not as conqueror and slave, not as queen and subject, but as equals. Her heart clenched. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with defiance, not with fear, but with truth. She wanted to deny it, to keep her crown, her pride, her walls. But the battlefield outside gave her no choice. The galaxy needed more than a queen, it needed hope. She gave the order. Across the stars, her fleets and the allied ships moved as one. For the first time in centuries, enemies fought side by side. Worlds that had cursed her name now shed their blood for survival. The monsters pressed harder, their tendrils tearing through ships, their roars echoing like thunder in the void. But the alliance did not break. The battle raged for hours, until the sky itself seemed to tremble. At the heart of it all, the Queen stood with the human, her flagship driving straight into the storm. Energy crackled, weapons flared, and the shadows swirled around them like a living nightmare. It was then that the Queen turned to him once more. Her voice was low, almost fragile. You once asked for truth. I gave it. Now I ask you, what do you desire, human? I promised you anything. Name it now and it will be yours. The chamber grew silent. Generals turned to listen. Even in the chaos of battle, the weight of her words hung heavy. He looked at her, steady and calm. I don't want your riches. I don't want your throne. I don't even want my freedom. What I want— He paused, his eyes locking with hers. Is for you to choose differently. To lead not through fear but through trust. To give the galaxy the queen it needs, not the tyrant it fears. The Queen froze. She had expected him to ask for power or for liberation or even for her downfall. But this was something she had never imagined. He was asking her not to give him the galaxy, but to give it hope. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in her life, the Queen, ruler of empires, breaker of armies, feared across the stars, was speechless. Outside, the shadows pressed harder, but something shifted. The fleets, inspired by the humans' words and the Queen's choice, fought with renewed strength. They were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting for a future. And as the flagship surged into the heart of the darkness, the Queen realized the truth she had denied for centuries. Power was not fear. Power was not chains. True power was the courage to change. In that moment, she no longer stood alone as a queen. She stood beside a human, and together, they lit a spark that turned the tide of the galaxy.